Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 3. My name is Stephen Hilborn, and today we'll be going through some of the design development and work areas. So I know last week when we all tried to meet, a few of you had some issues with accessing the meeting link. That's a first for me, but what I'm going to do here shortly after this, I record this, I'll put up an announcement for everyone with different ways in which to access the meeting. Because next week and what you'll be walking into is us going through a little bit of material, but we will be working on a 10% in-class assignment that must be done by the end of class or within a particular time from the end of class. So if you're watching this right now and it's the week before our class on Tuesday, please ensure that you on Tuesday will have good internet connection, as well as you have downloaded and are able to access Microsoft Visio. Okay. So a couple things that we'll be talking about today is the design development. So last week we looked at kind of the different steps of looking into facility design and what you would need to be prepared for. Today we're going to do 2 of those steps. So we'll look at design development, some of the standard flow of people, product, and employees, and we'll look at accessibility. And then what we'll do is that we'll lead off with having our first in-class assignment after this. So last week, we looked at the steps in the planning process. And the very first one was preparing that prospectus, which really took a look at the environmental scan, looking at what you want to do, what's the reason, the goals, the objectives, all that kind of stuff. Then we go from there and organize a planning team. So who would be part of a planning team in which that we were able to decide who would have a stakeholder relationship in this design. And that's usually ownership, management, maybe some consultants. And if you're doing a lot of construction or rebuilding, those would be the construction teams, the engineers, and things like that. Then you'd also have to conduct a feasibility study. So usually we'd stop and take a look at this as far as, is this going to be a new location or a retrofit or a renovation of another one? And then also a menu analysis, because much of when we do a facility design is really based on what is the menu today, as well as what do we think the menu may look like as it evolves in the future. Then we also look at we looked at some different desired architectural features, flooring, wood versus carpet versus tile. What do you put on the ceilings? What do you put on the walls? Why it's important? And looked at some very basic funding questions. So when it comes to the design development, pardon me, let's get rid of my gum. We're looking at determining space allowances and preparing a schematic to scale. So we want to show those space allowances. So after the completion of those preliminary preparations, feasibility, menu analysis, prospectus, cost, then we can start doing the actual design. So this is all pre-shovel in ground information. And then this is, okay, we're going to start actual building. So what we would be responsible for is the first 2 steps of these 5 steps, which is developing and designing our space allowances and our flow diagram, and then preparing a schematic or a layout to scale. So showing all the different space allowances that are required. From there, then you would prepare and submit this to any architects, builders, owners, all of that planning team for approval. You might make some changes. You might go back to these steps a couple times and then keep sending it back to the owners for approval. Then we start formulating contracts with some of the accepted builders. And then from there, we inspect all construction, electrical, plumbing, finishing. Again, we will not really be involved too much into these steps as far as a food nutrition manager, but we definitely want to have input on these first 2. So when you are developing space allowances and relationships, you must determine the floor space that will be required for a food service activity. And we have to take a look at what style of food service activity. So I know from my experience that a lot of food service activity in long-term care, retirement homes, retirement homes is more so almost like a restaurant style where you have a lot of seating. People have kind of set seating ideas of where they want to go. It's very routine based, and it's table service. Long-term care, I know it's a lot more room service, so it's not, the space is not nearly as important that we're taking up, because rather what we're doing is ensuring that there's not seating room in the front of house area, but rather room in the back of house area to have those carts that we can load up and travel to the rooms where they're going to be eating. Both of which, though, do require some sort of space allowance for it. So when we did the menu analysis and the prospectus guide, we were able to use this approach as well as some industry averages to start thinking about what we need, what kind of space that we're going to need. So first of all, as an example, a school cafeteria is usually 10 to 14 square feet per seat. So this would be per resident or per customer. So when you think about the size space that's going to be needed, 4 feet by 4 feet is 16 square feet. So 4 feet by 3 feet would be considered, that 12 square feet. So that's kind of the area that you would need for a school cafeteria. Now you do break down a bunch of different styles of seating here. So if you have a banquet dining, which is very similar to school cafeteria, it would be around the same, as well as a counter or fast service seating. When you get into prison and jail dining, as we talked about in the first particular lesson, we have to provide more space allocated to each individual inmate. Commercial cafeterias are a little bit, you give a little bit more space. Industrial and university cafeterias a little bit less. And then you have your hotels, your clubs, your fine dining. This is more so you're setting an ambiance. There's a little bit more level of luxury. So we like to space them out more. Usually what happens is the more space that we allow the customer to have, the longer that they stay. So when it comes to quick, fast service, in and out kind of style of food service, we want to give them less seating, because what will basically happen is that they will eat quicker and they will move on quicker. When we want to increase revenue, when we want them to stick around a while, order more appetizers, more entrees, more desserts, bottles of wine, we increase the spacing, the comfortability level, and then that way they're able to, they're enticed to stay longer. And then of course, wheelchair dining, and wheelchairs, walkers, whatever you may want to call it, accessibility dining, we give 24 up to 24 square foot per seat. So not every single resident in your workplace may need wheelchair dining spacing, but you have to come up with a percentage that makes sense. So if it's 50% or if it's 70% of all of your residents would require some wheelchair dining, that's how you have to kind of think about it when you do your space layout. So a couple other things about space allowances. In many average food service operations, 65% of the space is used for dining, while 35% is used for kitchen, storage, warewashing, washrooms, hallways, things like that. Now, this is very dependent on the style of operation. So as I said before, fine dining restaurants, they serve less food at a time. They want a less crowded dining room. So it requires less back of house space than a cafeteria, which serves a lot of people. So what you're going to have, depending on your space analysis, is you might have, as an example, if you're serving in a retirement home, you'll need a little bit more back of house space for all of those opportunities that you need to do in-room dining. You'll need to bring in a lot of carts. You'll have a lot of areas for prepping and loading up those carts, and less in the front of house. So maybe it's not a 50-50 split, but it might be a 55-45 split. So also the amount of food that is consumed offsite will affect the back house space. Hospital services, usually 33 to 50% of meals are served in the dining areas. The rest are in patient rooms. I think during COVID, the majority of you are all serving in rooms. Again, this is just another idea as far as some space allowances for specific kitchen types. So when we look at a kitchen, and we will here just in a minute, you want to take a look at all the different areas and what kind of space is required for each of these. So a receiving area is the area that we bring in all of our goods, and it's usually 1 square foot per seat, up to 2 square feet per seat. Dry storage is, again, dry storage and refrigeration are both different ways that we store our goods, depending. Dry storage we give a lot more room for because it's actually not that expensive to create because it's just shelving. And then refrigeration, it's less room because each 1 square foot of refrigeration is quite expensive. Preparation is the prep areas in which we prepare meals. As you can see, cafeterias have the least amount of square foot per seat required, whereas in hospitals that may require a lot of food modification and a lot of different items, you need the most. Dishwashing here, let me move this. Dishwashing is fairly standard. Again, hospitals require a little bit more. Sanitation, obviously hospitals require more square footage. And you will see some of the totals here at the bottom where in a cafeteria, you might need 11 square foot of kitchen space versus up to 20 feet per seat of kitchen space. So 20 feet would be 4 feet times 5 feet. So if you look on a floor and you kind of measure out 4 times 5 feet, that's per seat that you have in the restaurant. So if you have a 50-seat restaurant or dining area, then you can actually do the math and figure out how big your back of house area should be. Now, these are estimates. These are guides to kind of work within. It's not necessarily set, and you can be more efficient with your space than what this shows here. So these are some industry standards or industry averages that exist. But if you are more innovative and if you're more efficient, you can cut down the space requirements for these spaces without hopefully losing any of the safety. And also in, you still want to create a nice workspace for your customers or for your employees. Next one is the standard flow schematic for food services. So how does food move around most kitchens? So what you'll see here is that we start out with our receiving area. So in our receiving area, it's usually the back door for most places where they come in, they load the trucks, and they unload it into this receiving area. In this receiving area, usually what happens is that you're counting to ensure you get everything. You're looking at your invoice and you're comparing it to all the goods in front of you, and you're checking a lot of this food to ensure that it has come in proper. So you don't want rotten tomatoes. You don't want frozen items that should still be frozen. If they're thawing, you'll send it back. Those are the things that we're looking for. As you can see here, from the receiving area, they will either go to a dry storage area or a cold or frozen storage. Now, so it's important to have these two areas, dry storage and cold and frozen, closely related to the receiving area. We don't want to be walking this, 50 steps, 100 steps, all the way from the receiving area to the cold frozen area. It just takes too long. The next step is from our storage into a couple different places. So it can go to a pre-preparation area. So if you think about cold or frozen, let's say we have a lot of produce in the fridge, tomatoes and onions and everything else. What we might do is we might be chopping, cleaning, and prepping and getting them ready for our main cooking area. We also might be pulling a lot of yeast and flours and spices and everything else into a bakery preparation area. And most of that stuff, the bakery in the pre-prep is processes that are used that we're not ready to serve to the customer yet, but we are removing some of the steps that are going to be required when we do choose to serve to the customer. And finally, once you are able, we also might bring in some of this cold and frozen storage stuff, such as steaks that are just ready to be cooked, right into that main cooking area and store it there. Now we're going to be adding heat and finalizing all of our dishes. So in our main cooking area is where most of the action will happen. Again, this must be closely related to our storage, some of our pre-prep areas, and our dry storage. From that main cooking area, they will create their meals, add heat for the final time, which will go to a serving unit. So a serving unit could be a heat lamp. A serving unit could be a pass where you give it to a finished plate to a server and they run it into the dining room, or it could be into a hot holding cart where you can put in hot meals into this cart and then run it up to residents' rooms. So it's all very dependent on what you consider your serving unit to be. You might also have ready to serve desserts or salads that are pre-prepped, ready to go, and just need to be plated and sent. And then you might have some stuff coming out of the bakery as well. Then what happens is that it goes to the guest and or the customer and or the resident. They eat, they dine, they enjoy. The staff will then take all that stuff back into the warewashing area. So pot, pan, and washing and dishwashing. They will wash it all up. And then they will bring all the excess food and scraps and everything into the trash removal. So it's kind of a full system where they start from the receiving area, store all the goods, pre-prep all the goods, cook it, serve it, send it to the customer, wash and clean, and then back. And they'll do this 2 or 3 times in a day, perhaps even more. So what the important part of understanding this is that when we look at this, we have to understand that this is also gives you an idea of the layout of what a kitchen should look like. There are connector points. So all these areas are the connector points, and they should be closely related to the arrows that are going through. So even the main cooking area should be closely related to the hot or to the pan and warewashing area, because there's a lot of saute pans and baking trays and all that kind of stuff that'll come off there that you don't want to walk a really long distance to get back to the pot and pan area. As well, they're going to wash these and want to bring them back to the main cooking area. So this is a very good, gives you an idea of the schematic of the restaurant, the layout of the restaurant, and when you create these areas, where they need to be in relation to others. So the next step is that we're going to have to actually draw this flow diagram into a preliminary floor plan schematic. So it's a floor plan is a design or designs of possible arrangements of work units with equipment drawn to scale. Microsoft Visio is good. Most of the units are to scale, but what you will notice that as you start doing your major project, your redesign of the Georgian dining room, we will need to research the size of equipment and then create it and set it into our floor plan, right? Because not all fridges are the same size, not all deep fryers are the same size, not all stove tops are the same size. So we get to pick and choose, and then we will create those, and I'll show you how to do that. We also have to include all traffic aisles and transportation routes. And so some general guidelines is main transportation routes must be a minimum of 5 feet or 60 inches. This will allow you the use of carts. Aisles between equipment should be at least 36 inches or 4 feet, 48 inches where doors can be opened. So some equipment like a deep fryer, which has no doors that will open necessarily, are fine. But when you think about stoves or ovens that have big doors that open, you want to give at least 48 inches between those. So when we try to transfer the workflow over to the floor plan, we'll identify issues. And what the issues that we want to look for are these. So these are what we're going to call congestion points. So we have a certain amount of congestion points that happen. Now this is a a house plan, so it's not exactly something that we can look at and compare. But as you can see, coming into the main room, there's a big congestion point here by the cover deck going outside, all through the kitchen and trying to go out to the garage or up the stairs or down the stairs. These seem like congestion points. So what we would do in our own kitchen is that when we have it all laid out, we would just kind of track the movements of food and the movements of our employees, find those areas that they cross each other far too often, and then maybe realign or change the spacing of that area. So there are 7 principles of universal design, and I'll just go through them briefly. So the first one is the equitable use. So this is making sure that our design is usable by a diverse population. And it's not only the fact when we talk about accommodations for any disabled, but it's also children, very tall people, very short people, people that are considered perhaps obese, hard of hearing, blind, all of these. We want to have an equitable design for as many people as possible. You also want some flexibility, so usable for a variety of reasons and activities. So there's going to be certain areas in your design, in the kitchen as an example, your hotline. So this is what's under all of those hoods. So those are the ventilation hoods. Any open flame in a kitchen has to be under a ventilation hood. So that's not really flexible, right? That's set in place. We can't really move around or change that. But maybe in the prep area, maybe in some of the storage areas, we have different ways that we can move around. It could be equipment on wheels and casters. It could be tables that fold up or go up or down. As much flexibility as we can. A simple and intuitive design, so the area can be easily understood. Perceptible information, so easy to see and understand information. So this could just be where the exit and the entrances are, which way to go to the washroom, all those things that a customer needs to know, that an employee needs to know. Tolerance for error, so we're going to minimize hazards. So this could be corners that we walk around that were very perhaps dangerous, especially with hot food, grease, knives. Most all the back of house, we want to minimize the hazards as much as possible. Low physical effort, so we can use these areas comfortably with as little fatigue as possible. Because as I mentioned previous, just like our equipment, our employees are prone to breaking down. They have a lifespan, and we want to work with them as long as possible. So as long as we design these areas to be used as comfortably as possible, we'll ensure that our workforce stays healthy. And then, of course, size and space. So reasonable amount of space for areas with all levels of mobility. So essentially meaning that we want all of our diverse population to be able to use these areas in the right amount of space. So we pay for space. We pay for square foot. That's how most leases and rentals of areas. So I don't want you necessarily just to create the most open space possible, because it's not necessarily the most efficient with our money. There's the right amount of space for areas. So now this goes into some of the AODA, which is the Accessibility for the Ontario Disabilities Act. So these are some of the requirements that you must have in some of your designs. So when it comes to wheelchair, so we're going to look at a lot of wheelchair movement paths. These are the minimum requirements. So if you have an area where you need to have a 360 degree, it's 96 inches, okay? Which is usually when we're in class, it's fun. We have a couple wheelchairs, and I'll tape out areas and I'll see if you can do it. Because these are minimums. It's actually difficult to turn a wheelchair around in 96 inches. And for this one here, it's quite difficult to get into this area and back out as it's shown here with this space. So these are minimums that you have to abide by, and feel free to give a little bit more. So minimum room for a 180 degree turn is 30 inches by 54 inches. Now, I want you to refer to this PowerPoint as we do design. It's kind of difficult to remember all of these. So as we go through, just ensure you're always referring back to it. So these are some minimums for different travel patterns as well. So this is a clearance at perhaps an alcove. With the parallel approach, the depth should be no more than 15 inches or less. As you can see, clear floor space for a wheelchair here is 30 by 48. So that's just if you need to go and store a wheelchair or have somebody pull up on a wheelchair. It's minimum 30 inches wide by 2 feet or 48 inches long. Parallel approach, so you want someone to go into a little cubby or a little area. You'll see you need 54 inches. And again, that I think it's 30. And then also clear space for a scooter, which is a little bit smaller, 26 inches, but 54 inches long. Also, when it comes to, so we might have some employees who are have a disability or immobile, so they might be working in a wheelchair. So a side reach, so as an example, reaching up onto a table or a light switch or trying to plug something in, it should be at least 9 inches off the floor to a maximum of 54 inches high. And the 10 inches is the maximum reach. Okay, so 10 inches from your side of your wheelchair over, 10 inches, 9 inches off the ground, 54 inches high, and then 54 is quite high as well. That's over 4 feet. So that's the maximum. Side reach over an obstruction. So as shown here, we have a countertop. Should be no more than 34 inches off the floor to a maximum of 46 inches high. And 24 inches maximum reach. So 2 feet in is the most that we want to say is that you can go over an obstruction. As you can see here, forward reach has a maximum reach of 16 inches because now you have your legs in front of you. So it's 16 inches off the floor to a maximum of 47 inches. We lose some of that reach. So if you have an area where they're not able to turn their wheelchair and come at it from the side or a parallel approach, what they would have to do is then they have to go forward. You're going to have to raise it up off the ground and lower it from that 54 inches down to a max of 47. Also, the optimum eye level range for reading is in between 43 and 51. So that's only a 7-inch area. So again, if we have a lot of air, if we want to communicate to people who are immobile and in wheelchairs, this is the right place to do so. As far as work surfaces, we have the forward reach over an obstruction and another forward reach over an obstruction. It gives you some more information here as far as the amounts that are required. I won't go too much into these there. This one here is probably the most important when we have travel corridors, which we're going to a lot. So in my experience, usually what happens in a retirement home anyways, is that you might have 60 to 80% of your residents using some sort of mobility device of some sort. It could be a cane, a walker, scooter, wheelchair, whatever. Some service dogs, although you don't see this too often. So what you have to understand is that each have their own detectable range or their own range that they require. As a cane, it's 30 to 60 inches of detectable range, 42 for a service dog, 43 for a wheelchair, 54 inches for a wheelchair and upright walker. That's beside each other. So it's someone that's walking by them, someone that's walking by them and someone that's wheeling by them. And then also side-by-side wheelchair is 72-inch minimum. Now these are minimums. We usually say there's at least 30 inches is required for someone, or 36 inches are required for someone to travel. So that's 36 inches. You don't want hands smashing against each other. So in your dining area, you might not have every single travel corridor to be 72 inches, but you might have main travel corridors. So when you look at like a Walmart or a Costco or any kind of grocery store, there's always main travel corridors, which are very wide, and then there's some smaller ones. Even a gas station has this. So you're gonna have 72-inch 1 or 2 main corridors. You'll have a bunch of 54-inch ones that are very well traveled, but not as much. And then you might have some smaller ones, which are 43.25, which is the minimum for a single wheelchair. This is just a really good slide. It gives you just all of some more information about doors and how to use doors, as well as ramps and how to create ramps in the different ways that you can do so. This is not going, some of the wheelchair minimum accessibility stuff will be testable material. The doors and the ramps and things like that will not be testable material. But should you have a redesign, so in the Georgian Dining Room major project redesign, we have an area that is steps. And there's no ramp. So we're obviously going to have to adjust that and change that. So we're going to have to figure out, okay, what is the slope or what's the height that we require to get up and down? And then therefore we'll know how long this ramp will need to be. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what we're talking about. After this, what we're going to be doing is our first in-class assignment. We're 10%, and it's a very introductory assignment to Microsoft Visio. So I will see you all in class Tuesday at 1 p.m. I'll go through over a couple of the main things that we want to talk about, but other than that, I'll see you there, and good luck.